Thank you for watching the Cover One Buffalo podcast. Tonight, we have Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders on. We're going to talk a little bit of DVOA. He's got an Almanac coming out that I've been reading all day. You got to get your hands on this thing if you're a football fan, not just a Bills fan. So we're going to talk to him about all that good stuff right after our introduction from Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia worldwide with Greg Thompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Thompson along with my partner in crime Aaron Quinn. Aaron, we have made it through the long, cold winter of football. We are now back. Players have reported for training camp. The Football Outsiders Almanac is out. Right. It is time. Football is back.
Football is back, and I'm so excited for this episode that I totally botched introducing the show, clicking buttons. I'm just all gassed up for football, man. It feels like it. The humidity in the air, unfortunately, here in Western New York today felt like training camp. It is upon us. I'm super excited. You mentioned that Almanac. Look at this thing, guys. We're going to have Aaron here talk about this, but look at this book.
It gives me like heartburn for like college textbooks. There's so much information.
It's phenomenal. It's fantastic. I've been learning a ton, not just about the Bills, about the whole NFL, and I'm excited to talk to Aaron about this tonight.
So without further ado, tonight's guest, Aaron Schatz, editor-in-chief of Football Outsiders. Aaron, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, guys. I love the interstitial graphic when you introed the show. Devin Singletary was front and center, and he's on my Scott Fishbowl team. So.
Nice, good selection. I am in the slowest slow draft in Scott Fishbowl history. We're in like the 9th round right now. It's insane. Every single guy takes all 8 hours. I'm happy with my team, but it's not good for my heartburn.
Yeah, no, that sounds terrible. And here on this show, we'll talk about some of the Bills players and stuff, but I'm glad you brought up Devin Singletary too, because that's a guy that we've oddly had to sort of defend against Bills Mafia here, because I think the perception of him when you just look at some of the data and versus actually what the player he is a totally different thing. So we'll get into some of that, but for our listeners who maybe aren't aware of Football Outsiders, I know most of our listeners should be, because we do every single week when we're doing our preview shows, I'm comparing DVOA. So if they're not listening, then that's a problem I got to work on with them. But for anyone that isn't aware of what you do or what Football Outsiders is all about, could you just give us kind of a rundown of how you started and what Football Outsiders provides to the football fans?
Well, it's the original football analytics site. This is going to be my 20th year covering the NFL. We launched in July of 2003. And, it's deep analysis of the play-by-play, but also scouting and film work. And we kind of combine it all and, write it up. Good writers. I've had a lot of good writers come through Football Outsiders who've gone on to bigger and better things, like Bill Barnwell at ESPN and Michael David Smith of Pro Football Talk, and Ryan Wilson of CBS, and Andy Benoit, who just won a Super Bowl ring with the Los Angeles Rams, used to write for me. So I got started because I was a fan. I grew up reading Bill James and the baseball analytics people, and I felt like I had questions about football and no one was answering them, and so I was going to answer them. And I've said, Bill James got his start just counting stolen bases out of box scores. I'm just going to count box scores. And I ended up with a spreadsheet of every play in the NFL from the 2002 season, and I just started doing stuff with it, and that's how we ended up creating DVOA. And then we launched the site, and people took a lot of notice of it and came and wanted to write for me, and here I am almost 20 years later.
And I got kind of a follow-up to that before I let Greg take a question here. Back then, right, like there's still sort of and I'm part of this too, of a sort of a pushback against analytics in football. And that's now, like all these years later, where analytics is deeply embedded into everybody's favorite football team, and it's all over the internet and social media, and there's still some pushback. What was the pushback like when you were starting? Because it had to be much more.
It was kind of nuts. There were people in the NFL who got interested in it right away. Jim Schwartz, when he was defensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans, was interested in what we were doing right away. And the folks who ran the Philadelphia Eagles were always really open about analytics. But no, the pushback was strong. Even now, like Cam Hayward just tweeted, I think like yesterday, about the importance of the run in the playoffs. And it's like, no matter how much work we do to show just how much the pass dominates the league, like people, like current players who should know better, still believe that like the run matters a lot more than it does. You know, not that you want to be able to run the ball. It's good to have a balanced offense,
but balance isn't what people claim it is. Yeah.
When you've got a lead, you want to be able to salt the clock, but people still have a lot of ideas about the run in the past that are, from the 70s, and the game has changed a lot since then.
Yeah. So obviously it's no coincidence of why we're having you on now. Tell us about the Football Outsiders 2022 Almanac.
Well, it's like 570 pages. It's chapters on all 32 teams with a bunch of numbers from last year and then a bunch of writing about what we expect is going to come this year. Fantasy football projections and write-ups of all the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight end. Write-ups of the top 50 college football teams and projections for all 131 teams in FBS. I think they're up to 131 FBS teams. So that's all in there. And then our projections, all the simulations we do. There's a mean projection for every team and how often they win the Super Bowl in our simulations and how often they make the playoffs. And obviously one reason you want to have me on is that the favorite, not only in Vegas, but in our projections as well, this year's favorite is the Buffalo Bills. No question about it. They're the best team in the league coming into the 2022 season.
Well, I'm going to pull an Aaron. I'm going to switch my question one ahead now, because you haven't always been the most popular amongst Bills Mafia. You certainly know what the Twitter mentions can get like if you ever say anything cross of our favorite team. So just using that as an example of your obvious objectivity in the statement you just made about this season versus where it was before, that it wasn't that, you all of a sudden like them this year and you hated them back then. Can you talk through, have you seen this kind of overall turnaround in DVOA since you've been tracking it, of how far off it's been to now how huge of a shift across the board it's been?
I mean, teams have gone from bad to good in the NFL, constantly over the last 40 years. We have these numbers now going back to 1981, and there's just a constant cycle of teams going from bad to good and then back to bad and then back to good. And sometimes in a year, sometimes it's slower, like what's happened with Buffalo over the last 3 or 4 years, where they've really gradually built this thing. Reminds me a lot of the Patriots between like 2000 and 2004, except that the Patriots stumbled their way to a Super Bowl championship in 2001 that they never really should have won, because they were like the 11th best team in the league that year. But like they gradually went from like 11th to 9th to 4th to 1st, and then they dominated the league for a decade and a half. I mean, I know, look, the reason why Bills fans are angry at us, there's no question about it. It's because of the things that we wrote about Josh Allen, and we have been proven very wrong. And if a similar prospect came around now, I would write the exact same thing. Well, the fact is, Josh Allen had like a 1 or 2% chance of becoming the player that he's become. But guess what? Out of every 50 guys who have a 2% chance of becoming this, one of them will do it. That's how percentages work. That's how probabilities work. He was a really, really bad looking prospect from both a scouting and a stats perspective. And that's nothing against the fans of Buffalo. And yet he, all power to him and his work ethic and whatever he did to change his mechanics. But he's the guy. He's the one guy of all those 2%ers. He's the one that developed.
Yeah, it's really like it's not the same as a Tom Brady story, but it's got that similar thing of where for years people got talked themselves into late round picks. Well, Tom Brady worked out, right? Now you're seeing it's the Josh Allen effect.
But
after 2 bad years, look at our guy compared to his first 2 years.
He can do this
too.
Too.
For every Tom Brady, there's 20 Taylor Heineke's,
right,
and 100 Timmy Changs.
Yeah. And a Spurgeon win, win too.
Totally, yeah, no. So, and you're right. That is why we're mad at you, and why we're mad at PFF and all those people that said it. Even though we were also saying it, but prior to Josh Allen being selected by the Bills, because a lot of us, when they heard Josh, thought it was Rosen, and then it wasn't.
Literally, which we all thought Rosen was a better. I mean, our projection system actually liked Mayfield the best from that class and Lamar Jackson second.
That Lamar's a good hit for going fifth, and for his few people that shows it that direction as well.
One of your commenters just said praise Josh Allen, destroyer of math. I mean, look, he
anomalies, man.
He worked on his game. You won't find any of us. I mean, I guess I'm dissing him a little bit because I talk about his inconsistency, and he didn't do as well in our numbers last year as he did the year before. But he's one of the top quarterbacks in the league. We had a really interesting talk a couple weeks ago on our live cast, which we do at 1 p.m. Eastern, Tuesdays and Thursdays, footballoutsiders.com/podcasts to find out more. We were doing quarterback tiers, and I said I would rather have Justin Herbert than Josh Allen right now because of Allen's inconsistency. And then once we talked about it a little bit, we sort of changed that. I'd rather have Justin Herbert in the regular season, and I would rather have Josh Allen in the playoffs, because the chances that you're going to get one of those ridiculous out-of-the-world performances, like you need those to win Super Bowl.
Yeah. Joe Flacco had that run. He wasn't that quarterback all the time. He had that run when it mattered. We haven't necessarily seen that run from Herbert, even if we've seen an insanely high floor.
Right, and we did see that run from Allen last year. It only lasted 2 games because of the 13 seconds. But Allen was so good in those 2 playoff games.
To that point,
his high is just super.
It's so good. And to your point, Greg and I were talking a little bit off air. I was reading through some of the crazy things. Again, if you aren't buying this almanac, you got to get on it. I was like, last night I'm sitting on the couch blown away by some of the things that I'm reading. And one of them sort of is in line with this kind of who would you rather have. It was the Bills offense ranked 16th in DVOA for the first half of games, then 7th in the third quarter, and number 1 in the fourth quarter in overtime. And if you want a guy that's going to win you a game, I don't believe in QB wins, but in the playoffs, those games are close. Like we saw last year, every divisional game was super close, came down to the fourth quarter. You want one of the guys that plays best in the fourth quarter, right?
Someone pointed out, and this is really funny, Allen was really good last year when he was on prime time or national TV, like the playoffs, obviously, or nationally. And then there were all these like 1 p.m. like regional games where he was
the Jaguars
really
game.
Mediocre.
Yeah. Right? The Falcons game was horrible.
Maybe he's just bored with like 1 o'clock local games, and he's got to be on the bright lights. He's like the anti-Andy Dalton.
That's right.
There you go.
Hey, well, we had the guys that folded under bright lights for 20 years, so it's good to have a guy that can live up to it. So, going back into this almanac and looking through the whole NFL as a whole, which you guys did a great job of doing. This, since you're on a Bills-specific podcast, what did you see most that stands out about this 22 Buffalo Bills team that, led you to have them as that top team going into the season?
The first thing I'll point out is that our projections are known to be very conservative. They're really tightly around 500, more than the Vegas over-unders. And this year's simulation came out even tighter around 500 than usual. So the Bills' projection is low for a team we would consider the favorite, but they're still the favorites. And the thing about the Bills is that they're so well balanced. Their mean projection is 3rd on offense, 4th on defense, and 4th on special teams. And when you look over the depth chart, I can find one position where I have depth questions. Like even in the offensive line, they picked up guys like Greg Van Roten and David Quisenberry, who I wouldn't start David Quisenberry, but like if he's your backup tackle, you're in a good position. Like all their positions have good depth. They're very balanced between the offense and defense. They're very balanced run and pass. Like everything about this team is just good and balanced.
Yeah.
So going through and taking it from the Bills to maybe step out a little bit here, what would you see as this arms race that's built in the AFC? Who do you see as the biggest threats to the Bills? I assume when it's really tightly contested to the 500 mean, that probably means it's because it's hard to differentiate and it means there's more competition at that level.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. And the Chargers are our favorite other team in the AFC this year. The Chiefs, look, the Chiefs are still going to be dangerous, but the fact is when you lose as much skill position talent as the Chiefs have lost, like we use our DYAR stats to measure the value of skill position players. The Chiefs lost a net loss of more skill position DYAR than any team in the last 22 years. Like it's going to affect you when you lose.
I was expecting you to say the most in the league. I wasn't expecting you to say the most in 22 years.
Yeah. So we really like the Chargers. Defense take a big step forward, adding Khalil Mack, adding J.C. Jackson, even Sebastian Joseph Day, second year in the system. Like there's a lot of reasons to believe in the Chargers defense taking a big step forward. And we know that Herbert is strong and we know that their offense is strong. So that's the team we have ranked number 2 in the AFC.
Well, real quick follow-up there, and I know the Sebastian Joseph Day ad, maybe even a Cal Van Noy linebacker addition, the third safety to let Derwin James come down in the box. When you spoke previously about, obviously, the NFL is going to won by the pass, lost by the pass, that's how that goes. Was last year's Chargers maybe the exception that the run doesn't matter unless you're so horrible, unless you're so horrible at it that it becomes a statistical anomaly?
Yep. Yeah. Basically. Yep.
And it was just crazy to see a team give up that much, that far above everybody else. They weren't just last; they were last by a lot, they would need to, bring that back on you if they rein it back in.
Yeah, for sure. Sort of in that vein, when you guys are doing these projections, do you think the Chargers would be closer or even ahead of the Bills if they didn't have the division that they did and the type of competition within the division that they have, having to play all those teams twice a year, where the Bills probably have it a little easier in terms of that?
I think the Bills still come out with an above average schedule. Yeah, okay. The Bills still have an above average schedule. So the Chargers have actually an easier schedule than the Bills.
Interesting.
Because of their out of division games.
Right.
Because of the out of division games. So I don't think that affects.
So that their 6 against our 6 is much harder, but when it's 6 out of
we were
the other 11 games.
Their other games are not. The Chargers' other games are easier. I don't remember.
Yes. Winning the division will do that to you, right? All right. So now all the Almanac stuff, fantastic. But the real reason I wanted to have you on here, I wrote the Football Outsiders account a couple times here this winter, and they were great talking back and forth to me. They're always retweeting our posts that we make about DVOA. But I said, I'm posting about DVOA all the time. I'm talking about DVOA all the time. This is a stat I love because whenever I'm, prepping for any of these opponents or just want to explain how this team does with a stat that has some context baked into it and not just a blanket stat that I can throw out there, but has the context that I believe should answer a lot of the questions, the buts that I get in my mentions of, but they played this bad quarterback, or but the weather in this game, or whatever it is. DVOA is really, you've done a great job of adding context to stats, which allows us to use that as a good barometer, especially in season. Can you sort of explain to people, because I've not done a very good job of explaining DVOA in a bite-sized elevator pitch for people. Can you help me get this message out there of why we all need to be paying attention?
I will note, first of all, it does not adjust for the specific weather of every game.
Right. Yes.
It does adjust for indoors versus outdoors, and it adjusts for kicking in cold weather stadiums as it gets colder into December and stuff. But it's not adjusted for the fact that
the Patriots game,
the Patriots Bills game from last year was insane. What's really funny is even if we could have adjusted for the weather like that, there would be almost no adjustment to Mac Jones because he never threw the ball. There's nothing to adjust. So the basic deal is every play gets a success rating based on how many yards it gets on the down and distance, right? It's the basic idea of 10 yards is not good on a 3rd and 15. 10 yards is wonderful on 2nd and 5. That basic idea. then that success rating is compared to a league average baseline, which is adjusted for situation and opponent. And that's how you get DVOA. And then special teams are done based on kind of an expected points model that's then translated into DVOA so that we can add special teams to offense and defense.
So defense adjusted value over average is DVOA.
Right.
And then that's taking each scenario into the comparison of what the league average would have done in that same situation of, hey, if everybody had 2nd and 6, what is the average outcome? You guys got 8 yards. That gives you a success rating of X, and then you do that for every single play, and that adds up to who performs more or less than the average of what the rest of the league was.
Right, and it's called defense adjusted value over average. But of course, defenses are actually offense adjusted. I just, once it started, it was DVOA that
just kept it.
Just kind of kept it.
And then you were talking about DYAR or whatever you would call it. Explain that as well to people, because that's another one we use during season.
So that's our total value stat, because the idea is that there's value in a player who can be average with a lot of usage because he keeps you from using a bad backup. So we don't compare players to replacement level on their team specifically, right? We compare players to sort of a generic replacement level, but in other words, we're translating their value into a yardage total by comparing it to replacement level rather than comparing it to average. So players who have more usage will do better, and so it's a better measure of total value rather than value per play. Like a lot of times the top guys in value per play will be guys who just qualified to be ranked. Like the number 1 receiver in DVOA with a minimum of 50 targets was Kendrick Bourne, which is interesting. Kendrick Bourne was much more efficient than anybody would have ever imagined that he was last year. But the number 1 receiver in DYAR was Cooper Kupp. Right? I mean, he was the number 1 of all time. He had the number 1 season we've ever measured for 41 years. With thank you to the 17th game a little bit. But
okay. I was gonna say, even what is it, the what's the Rice season where he had the shortened one?
I think it would have been 4th or 5th. Oh yeah, the Rice season where he only played 12 games and he had
but put up almost the Randy Moss season in only 14 games for 12 games.
Our number 1 season before last year was actually Michael Irvin's 1995, because he was a unbelievable first down machine that year.
Crazy.
But it's great to bring context into things that aren't just the raw stats, aren't just those pieces of it, and to have a comparison of the efficiency element and the overall volume element. And there's some interesting examples. Last year, Derrick Henry would have been huge for DYAR in the portion he played because he was such volume driven. But then interestingly, you had, in my opinion, replacement level guys come in after he left, and the Titans' run game continued to perform at a pretty high level. So it's an interesting
generic replacement player, because also, the fact is that we don't separate the player from the blockers in running. We don't separate the quarterback from the wide receivers. We just don't have the charting data that we would need to do that immediately during the season. We get that data later on from our partners. So it's interesting, who comes out replacement level and who comes out above average. And who, Jonathan Taylor also last year had an amazing season. He had the 4th best rushing total of all time.
So one before we get you out of here, a good question from one of our listeners here, Thomas. Can you ever turn it off and just flat out enjoy a game like a fan, or is it always kind of, are you always viewing it from the Football Outsiders prism?
My analytics mind, of course, always thinks about, are they running too much, or what should they have done on this play? And 4th downs, of course, tick off my little flag in my head. But I'm a fan like anyone else. The fact is, when I'm at home watching, I root for my fantasy guys. I root for the Patriots. I'm very honest. I've been honest since I started doing this about being a Patriots fan. It's not my fault that when I started doing this, they got good, and they didn't stop being good for 17 years.
Yeah.
Eventually they will be bad. They were 2 years ago. But I scream at the TV and like any other fan, like not when I'm in the press box, because there's no cheering in the press box, but when I'm at home.
For sure.
All right. Well, on that note, let the folks know you mentioned the show on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1:00 on your channel. We're going to have the Football Outsiders Almanac in the description for the show. Make sure you're checking it out there. What else do you want to let the folks know about before we get you out of here?
Yeah, so there's two ways to get the Almanac. The first is the physical book. The physical book is $29.99 from Amazon. Just search for Football Outsiders Almanac 2022. Comes in beautiful Los Angeles Rams colors. And if the Bills win the Super Bowl, then next year we'll put it out in red and blue.
Hey, cool.
I like it.
And if you want the electronic version where you can read all the team articles or download a PDF that has the whole book in it, you have to be an FO Plus subscriber. FO Plus subscription also gives you our big Kubiak fantasy projection draft tool, our weekly fantasy projections during the season, picks against the spread, a bunch of fantasy research tools, and a whole DVOA database that goes all the way back to 1981. So you go to footballoutsiders.com/subscribe, and that is currently 20% off until the end of the month.
Yeah.
For an FO Plus subscription. And as soon as you get the subscription, you can download the book right away.
And if you're people like myself, it's not just all those things you mentioned, but then there's the adjusted sack rate stats. There's so many the run blocking percentages stats are where people are running from and the success from running from different spots.
The big one that you need to be an FO Plus subscriber to see is DVOA against specific types of receivers. Like who's the best at covering the 1, the 2, the 3, the tight ends, the running backs, with both DVOA and fantasy numbers to give you an idea of like DFS. Like this team, because of the way their coverage works, are really weak against number 2 receivers. Maybe that week you want to play
Gabe Davis.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like who's the number 2 in Dallas right now. Michael Gallup.
Is it Michael Gallup? I hope so. Speaking of Scott Fishbowl, I hope it's Michael Gallup.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love all that stuff. It's actually a little bit of a running joke with one of our other content contributors on Tuesdays during the season that that's when a lot of that stuff gets updated for us to dig into, and we're sending each other back.
Yeah,
Did you see this new change? Did you see this new thing?
You want to be a subscriber this year because the Bills are going to win the Super Bowl. So, it's a good year to be a subscriber.
Yeah. So, and a very genuine compliment to Aaron and everybody at Football Outsiders. People ask us all the time. We're on the nerdier side of the Bills Mafia content creation, all the things we put out, the analytical approach that we try to take to it. People ask all the time, what do you guys use? How do you get the information you get? We are longtime subscribers to Football Outsiders Plus. Yeah. We use it all the time. It's part of every single week. When you guys hear the previews that we do, all the graphics Aaron does comparing the DVOA approaches, because we didn't just have Aaron on out of the randomness. We use their site all the time. It is a big part of our preparation and what we do to look at the upcoming opponents, to see the progression of the team as the season goes. So we didn't just have him on for fun. It's because we're regular users and subscribers to the site ourselves.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, guys. We really appreciate it. We love having you use our stuff. We love having media folks use our stuff in previews, and having our numbers all over the place is great.
We appreciate it, man. Appreciate all the work, and enjoy this football season. And hopefully enjoy a nice Super Bowl run for the Bills, so your mentions won't be burned to the ground anytime you talk about it.
As a fan, I'll be sad for my team to not win the division, but as a prognosticator, I'll be like, hey, we were right.
Hey, you can point to yourself. Exactly.
Watch. I mean, the other thing is they're a fun team to watch.
That's true.
It's like if you're not worried about your team being in the game, and you're just like, who's fun to watch? Don't we want to watch Chiefs, Bills, or Chargers, Bills pretty much every week now?
Honestly, you're in New England, and I was in New England 2 weeks ago now, out on a boat in Portland, Maine, and I was talking to a bunch of Patriots fans, and they're like, they kind of threw their hands up like, you know what? I want to be mad and hate the Bills, but Josh Allen's a lot of fun, and he's going to be good for a long time. There's nothing I can do about it.
And they're just a well-run team, and they've built a really good thing. And listen, hey, even the guys who left, I mean, I think Shane and Dable are going to do a good job.
I do too.
The Giants are our worst projected team for this year. We do not like their current roster.
No,
But
I don't think Dable or Shane does either.
Yeah, basically. Basically, we don't think they do either.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about when McDermott and Bean came in, they didn't think they were going to have anything. They kind of got lightning in a bottle with that season and a bunch of really favorable one-score games and things, stumbled into breaking the streak, which actually made it easier the next year to take their medicine and have the all-time record in dead cap hit. That's a lot easier to pitch a fan base when you just broke a 17-year playoff drought. So, I think if this year, I don't know what exceeding their expectations are when you're 32nd in DVOA expectation. But say they exceed the expectations a little bit, it'll make it easier to move on from the Galladeys and all the contracts they have to blow their way out of next year. But I think they'll get it right over the long term.
Since Greg brought that up, one thing that you had in the Almanac that I think, did that change your view of the Buffalo Bills organization, that they didn't buy into, hey, they made the playoffs, let's keep this together and see if we can push this forward? They still made the playoffs, but continued on their building path.
I mean, 2 years ago, before Allen broke out, when we still had our very, very skeptical view of him, the chapter was basically, oh my God, look at this really great all-around team that they built, except for the quarterback.
Yeah.
And then the quarterback turned out to be great.
Yeah.
And all the other stuff they had was still really good. So, I mean, Bean and McDermott have done a fantastic job. There's no question about it.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. We appreciate your time so much, Aaron. A great show tonight. Awesome comments from the chat, commenting on everything here. We'll make sure to share the description there. We have a couple other things to do, but we'll let you go. We appreciate your time and looking forward to hopefully some fun games between the Bills and the Patriots, but some entertaining games for the Bills the rest of the time.
Yeah, this year, let's not do it with the wind.
Yes. Yeah, no hurricane style winds in the middle of winter would be great.
Weird games.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
Thanks.
All right. That was fun. I know that's something you've been prepping for a while and working on getting Aaron on the show, and you're, such a consistent, kind of disciple of what DVOA shows and explaining that. I thought that was awesome to be able to get the background on it.
Yeah, I hope that people listening, this is probably, that section of this podcast is probably one of our more evergreen outside of the Almanac stuff, but just talking about DVOA and DYAR, because I'm going to continue to pound that. I know Eric is big on all that stuff. He's using Football Outsiders constantly when it comes to what we do at here at Cover One we're not disciples necessarily of any analytic. What we do is, hey, those are tools that help us to go back and watch. So I look at DVOA before I even watch an opponent and say, and then when I'm watching them, I say, does this match up with what I'm seeing? And then if it doesn't, then we go back to the stats. And so that their site is littered with really good statistics where people will come out and say something. I can usually go to Football Outsiders and either verify that information or find out that they're wrong and feel confident in that data. So that's why I love them, having them on. And I hope that for our listeners, that was a good explanation of the data that they come up with.
Yeah, and I think it was really well done. We will for sure clip that video and share it throughout the season. You guys will see more of that as we go. But before we get out of here, we got a couple things we want to get everybody ready for. Aaron and I are going to be heading to training camp here, so we've got a couple topics coming up we're going to be excited about. And one other thing we're excited to announce is a renewed relationship with our guys over at Uncle Jumbo's. They have jumped back on to sponsor our show again for this season, and be along with that partnership, we're going to be heading out to their tasting room on Saturday night. So if fans want to come hang out, ask us some questions about the season, enjoy a lovely beverage from Uncle Jumbo's, we're going to be there 8:00 at the tasting room on Elmwood. Come on out and say hi. A whole bunch of the Cover One guys are going to be there before we head out to training camp on Sunday and Monday. And I know you set up a couple questions here on what we expect to see when we head out to training camp.
Yeah, so I figured, now's the time to have these talks. We're seeing all these articles that are coming out left and right over all these training camp topics. So it got me thinking about some of them. We've gone through position by position of this group, and I know that this might be redundant in some of the conversations that we've already had, but sometimes for me, having those conversations and thinking about it later on, I change my opinion on stuff. So some of these I want to kind of see where you're at before we get to Saturday, because I don't want to talk football with you. I just want to drink and hang out and have some jumbos. So position battles, I want to know for you, and then I'll give you mine. Which ones are you watching the most here heading into camp when we go?
So it's funny because the one I'm most interested in, they're tied together in my mind, and it's the balance between the return guy and the slot guy. And I'm curious, is there interplay between the two? Do they want those roles segmented? What if the guy that they want that is leading for the slot position also is leading for the return role? Before, we've seen that they prefer for the return guy not to be a regular starter. They like it when it's an Andre Roberts, a Marcus Stevenson, something like that. So is that an element where it's one of the younger guys? Is it Khalil Shakur who makes a surprise? Is it Jamison Crowder dusting off the return skills after kind of putting him away for a little bit? Is it Isaiah McKenzie? Is it Marcus Stevenson, who I think are maybe the first two names that could go after that return job? Stevenson, to get himself onto the roster. Whereas I felt from the time of the signing that Jamison Crowder was the leader in the clubhouse, going to be the slot receiver, and I didn't think it was terribly close. And I would be naive not to listen to some of the drumbeat of the beat guys who are there, who are telling us that Isaiah McKenzie has a chance at this role in this job, and that I still am betting on Jamison Crowder. I think it's going to be Jamison Crowder, but there's a little too much comment about what kind of chance and role McKenzie could have that I'm open to that now. That, hey, is it going to be one primary slot guy, or maybe is it closer to a 70-30, 60-40 split and both guys are part of the game plan? Maybe that's a thing. And I'm curious, does that mean it'll be someone else who has the return job? So I'm going to be watching, hey, who's getting reps with the first team out of Crowder and McKenzie, and who's the first guy in line when they're doing punt return and kick return, because I'm curious how those things are going to fall.
I totally agree. That was my number one, but what more so just the punt return role, because I think that ultimately has a trickle down, right?
I think so.
Kind of what you're saying. And I understand what you're saying, that people have been talking that, Isaiah could be a part of this offense, but I also have to pump the brakes myself on anything that happens pre-training camp, because I don't really know what the team is working on in those OTAs and mini camps, and who they're, hey, let's bring X guy along a little bit slower. He's new into the system. Let's kind of get him in here, not work him too hard. He's a vet. Let's, give Isaiah a chance to do something with it. There could be a lot of reasons why they're doing that in OTAs and mini camps.
Even the media who are beat reporters only see a minority of the snaps for they actually see less than half of the practice snaps.
Yeah. So I have a hard time taking anything out of that. And all I can see is my outside view of Isaiah McKenzie. And I really think he has to solidify himself as that punt returner, in my opinion, to really justify a role for him. Because even if it's that, hey, you're going to be a spell slot player, I do think Khalil Shakur can step in and do that role. I think that there's some redundancy in that slot position in the depth of the Bills wide receiver room. And so if you're not doing one thing or something different, then I have a hard time finding that active roster spot for you with how deep this team is. And you want to keep X amount of linemen on both sides of the ball. You want to keep an X amount of DBs, special teams players and stuff like that. And Isaiah McKenzie, if he's not a return guy and he's only getting 6 touches a game, maybe 12 snaps a game, like that's not enough for me to really keep a guy on the roster and give him an active spot. So to me, I feel like he has to run away with that job.
No, I think it's going to be super interesting to see that. That is an area where I'm curious, especially, Aaron Schatz talked about the depth on the roster. There's going to be some defensive backs and some other players that are going to be tough to keep off the roster, or maybe a 10th offensive lineman, maybe it
just has more potential usage.
Some value in the, having those guys game day active, having that availability when you can do, especially covering on some of the special teams units. It's going to be really interesting who they can fight to keep off that. Were there any other positions that stood out to you?
So I had 2 other ones. I had running back kind of 2 to 3, how that James Cook, really more how that Zach Moss, Duke Johnson thing settles out, because I think a lot of people just assume it's going to be Zach Moss because he's a guy that was drafted here, and that Duke Johnson was really that, hey, we missed out on McKissick, but then we got Cook, so his role's out. But I'm not totally sure that it's just set as Zach Moss. I think he's still going to have to earn it. So I'm interested to see how that one shakes out. And then it sounds kind of silly, but I'm pretty interested to see how this backup safety, because we see this contract situation with Jordan Poyer not yet resolved. that group is going to start to age out. I really want to find out what's behind those guys to see, or well, shoot, do the Bills really have to prioritize drafting a safety in this next draft, or sort of finding out who's the heir apparent to that safety duo? Or do we feel confident that we've got some guys that can show some stuff here this summer that we can feel a little bit better, at least in a backup role? If somebody was to get hurt, like who's going to be that backup safety and take that job?
Yeah. And I know we have some big, both Damar Hamlin and Jaquan Johnson fans amongst the Cover One staff.
I'm a big Damar guy.
I have been on the outside looking in. I have been adamant that I don't feel the future starting safety is on the roster and that we would need to acquire it. But there's enough guys that I respect that I'm open to it. I'm interested to see.
Don't sleep on Thomas either, Josh Thomas.
Yeah, no, honestly, but could he step into that third safety role if they needed to move on in that direction? And I think there's enough history of McDermott, Frazier, John Butler, all those guys being able to develop secondary players that I have to be open to the fact that, hey, Poyer wasn't a starting caliber safety when he got there either. He was a late round pick. He was undersized. He wasn't a, RAS score monster. It took development to get him there. Maybe that's what happens with Damar Hamlin. I have some concerns about the physical limitations for Jaquan Johnson. I'm more open to it with Hamlin. But it is going to be interesting to see where those things come into play.
Yeah, thanks, John, for that, by the way. That was
that's awesome.
John, you're the man. You're always supporting us. We see it. We appreciate you, my man.
Pivoting to the next one.
Yeah, so we got bubble candidates, right? That's the talk of the time this time of year. What's kind of fun, we talked about this the other day on our show, it's not as interesting of a thing, bubble guys, as it used to be. Right?
This was hard to do. It was really hard to find all that many super questionable guys.
Yeah, and usually it would be bad players on the Bills, right? I think there's some decent names that I came up with that I'm keeping an eye on. And also the one thing that I'm not doing is looking league wide at bubble players. I remember Googling at this time of year every year is who's going to get cut from another team that we can maybe scrap together something good. The Bills don't have that problem this year. If anything, there might be some decent players that Bills fans like that are going. I'll go first on this one because it really lines up with where I was at with punt returner. For me, the top one's Isaiah McKenzie. I know it. I hear what you're saying about the reports coming out about him, but the more I look at this roster and the more I look at things, I think he's redundant. I think that he's a bit limited. And so if he doesn't prove otherwise that he's not a limited guy to me, I see a good player that the fans like that just doesn't have a role that I think is needed on the team. And then my other one would be sort of that Zach Moss, Duke Johnson battle of who's going to keep that last running back spot.
And I can see where that one's going. I think the contract is strong enough for McKenzie and Crowder both that I think they're pretty close to locks. I do think that next spot, I don't know if anybody can push Jake Kumro just because of his coverage ability and the fact that we actually have very limited depth at outside receiver. And I think Kumro might be that next guy who steps in. And I watched the NFL Network countdown. Unfortunately, the Bills have a bunch of games on that countdown, and they're all the ones we lost, which is frustrating.
No, thanks.
I watched the Buccaneers game through the comeback, and Kumro's out there a ton in some of those reps and the things that are there. I think that's an interesting one. It's really, can a Stevenson, and Isaiah Hodgins, can one of those guys beat out a Tommy Sweeney for the third tight end? So instead of a third tight end, because Reggie Gilliam can play tight end in a pinch, do they keep a seventh receiver? Is it one spot for Greg Van Roten or Greg Mance or Cody Ford, or is it two or three? Is it how many interior guys do they keep? Because I'm assuming Ike Botker is probably on the physically unable to perform list. So do they keep 9 offensive linemen where 2 of those guys make it? Or do they keep a 10th guy where all 3 of those guys make it? The same thing, does the Andre Smith suspension lead to Balin Spector having a chance to make it, or is it Balin Spector versus Christian Benford versus McKenzie versus Sweeney, Stevenson versus Sweeney, and it's those 4 different positions, but that's the 53rd spot that they're fighting for, and that, hey, one guy who can play special teams coverage, and all of a sudden it's Christian Benford making it as a 10th defensive back. It makes it over a 6th linebacker, makes it over a 10th offensive lineman, makes it over a 7th wide receiver, because we'll have one extra spot somewhere. So those are the kind of the guys. in years past, there's been like really hard fought battles. Now, so many of the spots are like, hey, I can tell you exactly which 9 defensive linemen we're going to keep. I know which ones. I can tell you exactly which, 4 safeties we're going to keep, and we're probably not going to keep a 5th one. And each of those different spots, like, hey, we know exactly what's going to be here. You mentioned it. We know we're going to keep 3 running backs. I don't think we're going to keep a 4th. I don't think there's much path for both Johnson or Moss to make it. Oh, yeah, you're right. It's 4th versus 5th. So having Taiwan Jones technically a running back in there as the 4th guy versus a 5th one. So having the 5 bubble cut candidates, they're all kind of lower priority guys for me. And it's really who's clinging on to that 53rd, 54th, 52nd, 53rd spot on the roster.
Yeah, I don't believe the Bills. I think when the roster comes out, I think Isaiah McKenzie will be on it. I just want to put out there that I really don't see. I don't like the usage of an active game day roster spot used for such a limited player. Yeah. That's just a personal preference thing. That's why I keep having him show up. I'm really not even an Isaiah McKenzie hater. It's just that he's such a limited player. I just don't see the purpose for him. But the Bills love him a lot more than I do. Their PR shows it.
Their PR loves him.
Yeah, the beat reporters are not lying when they say they see him out there a lot. So I don't want people in my mentions coming at me. I don't want Isaiah McKenzie in my mentions coming at me telling me I'm a hater.
Yeah. If searching your name on Twitter was a football stat, he'd be a Pro Bowler.
Yeah, he'd be the best. But Thomas here brings up one that kind of leads into my next question here, talking about AJ Epinesa, because I had another question for you was who needs the biggest camp to keep their job, which is sort of in line with bubble guys, but a little bit different. And I'll let you go first on this one.
So I won't steal Epinesa because he was second on my list. Cody Ford was my first one, in that I think he's a guy that needs a good camp, in that he's also a guy that had just enough draft value that he's an easy trade candidate. We've seen lesser offensive linemen get traded at the cut down day. I think you could have another front office who had him graded well, that also had him as a late first, early second round pick. And now you can get him for a future 6th, a future 7th, and you get that last, rookie year contract super cheap. I do think there's a possibility that he needs to have a camp not to get traded, in that, I think that if push comes to shove, he probably makes it as a 9th lineman, just because he has starting experience, and they're going to give him a shot at camp with Aaron Cromer to see if Cromer can kind of rekindle some value there. Right. But he was my guy who stood out as needs the biggest camp to keep their job and keep their roster spot. I had as one there. And then obviously Dane Jackson. I think Dane Jackson is a guy who starts with a leg up, but that anytime you make a first round pick, he would need to play exceptionally not to have Kaiir Elam step in as the starting guy the first day Trey White's back. Yeah,
I'm going to assume it's Elam as soon as Trey's back, and that Dane Jackson's job to lose would be cornerback 3, which I don't know that that's really being challenged. I'm hoping to see a challenge to that.
Yeah, we've heard some buzz from Nick McLeod, but I don't think it's to that level.
Not yet. I not the way Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have publicly talked about how they feel about Dane Jackson, I don't think. I was with you. Cody Ford is a slam dunk for this category, absolutely. And I agree that he could be a trade candidate. I don't think it's out of the question. The reason I mentioned Thomas is because AJ Epinesa was actually my number 1. I think that because there's a little bit of a log jam in terms of the stuff we were just talking about, how you build that roster, there's a lot of linemen. We say, hey, I can guarantee you the 9 that it's going to be. But if AJ Epinesa stumbles in camp or just isn't producing to the way they want, I could see the Bills sort of in the same vein as a Cody Ford of saying, hey, like, we're really not getting the progress we want out of them. There might be a team out there that had a similar round grade that the Bills did, and you can just move on and get some assets and then have a Boogie Basham. I know you had talked about him being one of the guys that might come out and surprise some people, where if he comes out and has a strong camp, and then you get Shaq Lawson stepping into the role that he was doing and being a more reliable guy, you start to lose the ability to say, when you're looking at this rotation, that, man, AJ, you might be the odd man out in terms of there might not be a lot of snaps there for you if these other guys are stepping up the way that we think they can. So it's either going to be a guy like Basham stepping up and taking those snaps, or it's going to be Epinesa stepping up and taking those snaps. So this should have maybe been one of my battles to keep an eye on is, this rotation of defensive ends, young defensive ends, is who's going to be the guy to step up, because they might keep the 9 and AJ Epinesa might keep his job in terms of being on this roster, but really he's fighting for those snaps, and a bad camp is going to make it hard for him to get into that rotation, start to get those snaps back, and really resurrect his career here in Buffalo and be the guy they draft him to be.
I think it's very feasible that a bad camp could result in being the odd man out of game day active.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll go this far. There's no chance he gets released.
No,
I'll say that there's literally zero chance that AJ Epinesa gets released. I will say there is a chance. There's always a chance a guy could get traded. I think there's a chance, in a similar vein of what I said for Cody Ford, that he could be a cut down day trade candidate. I think that's even honestly pretty low. I don't think it's likely. I'm open to the fact that if Boogie Basham and Shaq Lawson both have a good training camp, he could be the Cody Ford of odd man out, game day inactive, kind of a disappointment. And then next year we're talking about, well, all right, is it kind of time to move on? Do we cut bait? And then next year he could be there. I don't see any scenario where a second round pick going into year 3, especially with the changes in body makeup and things like that, that he's doesn't make the roster this year, short of a trade, which would be surprising. But I do think that he could lose that battle and lose his game day active role, use his job from being active on game day. I could see that.
I agree. It's not necessarily performance related here, but you're a contract guy, you're a money guy. You like to think about how this roster is going to be built often. I want to get your view. We talk about news this time of year. There's not a lot of good news that comes out. We don't want to hear. I actually have gotten a little bit concerned every time I see the Bills app tell me something. It's usually just a promotional thing, but the Bills app will buzz me, and I'm like, oh man, did somebody fall at the beach, or what bad news happened? But there is a little bit of good news that could hit our phones any day here before the season starts, and it's talking about extensions. And we have a number of Bills players that are in that ballpark for either getting extension. We know Jordan Poyer is actively seeking a new contract. Do you expect any extensions to get done here throughout training camp period of time here before the season starts up? And if so, who are you expecting to see an extension? If you want to go even further to predict the extension, go for it.
So I think there are a handful of candidates where it's possible that we see an extension. So some of the guys where it's possible would be Jordan Poyer, Dawson Knox, Tremaine Edmonds, I'll say Ed Oliver and Devin Singletary. And I listed them in my order of likelihood in my mind. So if I had to set the over-under between now and the start of the season, or even we saw Taron Johnson was a little bit into the season last year. So between
which was
now,
rare. That was not
correct.
a common move for them.
Unlikely. So between now and early season, even I would say between now and the start of the season, if I set the over-under at 0.5 extensions, I would take the over. I think we see an extension. I don't know that we see multiple, but I think that we see an extension between now and the season. And I think there are 3 guys where I think it's greater than 50-50 that they get extended between now and the start of free agency next year. We'll see when it happens. Because of how much the agent is pushing it, I'm going to list Jordan Poyer first. Now, whether that is just an adjustment of money and accelerating some stuff, guaranteeing a little bit of money, something along those lines, or, hey, here's guaranteeing some money and a little bit more than the franchise tag next year, or it's legitimately 2 years, $25 million, close to fully guaranteed to keep him on the roster through the same time period as Micah Hyde, plus give him a little extra cash for this year, when this year he actually is making a really low amount of cash, $5.7 million compared to others, even though he had a front-loaded deal. Which
I would love to have that be
happens
my
ever. Wouldn't that be great?
So
So I'll put him first. I will put, it was a 1A, 1B. I think that long-term, value to Josh Allen, the kind of player they want to build around, I was torn and debated between him and Dawson Knox. I think it's very likely Dawson Knox is extended. I think it's going to be a higher number than any of us want to see. Just the way that the tight end market is, especially the deal David Njoku just got, it's going to be $14 million a year. I'd love to tell you it's going to be 12.5 and that we could get him for, 12.5 million. I think it's more. I think David Njoku's deal really is difficult. I think it's going to be 4 years between 50 and 56 million, in that range. I think it's going to be between that 12.5 and 14 million range. 4 years, 50 to 56 million, probably closer to the 56. Maybe Bean pulls a rabbit out of a hat and it's somehow a team-friendly deal. But I think the structure will be fine. I expect that deal to happen. I don't know if I really care if it's between now and the start of free agency next year. No. I just don't see all that much possibility that Dawson Knox leaves. I just don't.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The third one that I am the most torn on, but is more likely than an early one for Ed Oliver. We'll deal with that later. He's under contract this year and next year. It's just not an urgent situation. And I don't think Devin Singletary is super likely because we haven't seen them invest a lot of money in running back. We'll see if it happens. It's possible they come to a 2-year, $8 million deal or something.
Yeah, I don't know that he would get a lot of money.
Correct. Yeah, we'll see. It was the same idea as Levi Wallace. Like, hey, they already kind of plan on moving on. We don't know what the market is. We'll see. We'll deal with that next year. I doubt it's early. The one remaining is Tremaine Edmonds. You've talked about it a lot. They have shown through their actions, through their words, how much he is valued as a player, as a leader, the quarterback of the defense, the play caller of the defense, the leader in that locker room. Leslie Frazier talked about it. I think there is a lot of value in both sides wanting to see him perform this year, in that the team wants to see, in this new setup with the defensive tackles they have and a full healthy season and Milano next to him, can he reach the potential we think? And I think he and his representation want to see him do that because he'll get paid more. And I think if he plays really well, the team's going to give him the $14 to $16 million a year that he wants. They will. And there's going to be fans who are upset about it. There's going to be fans who are going to freak out and say, oh, well, sure, now that we had a great season from Daquan Jones and 4 good defensive tackles and great pressure in front of him and a good secondary, now he plays well. Yep, that's how it's going to work. And that I know fans will complain about it, but it's going to end up being, 4 years, $60 million, 4 years, $64 million, $16 million a year. It's going to be more money than people like, and they're still going to pay him. And it's going to be a big deal. I don't think it's a guarantee. I think there's a chance that if he has another middling season, they could roll the dice and decide that, you want to know what? We could just start the clock over again and draft another linebacker in the first round and take our chances. I think it's less than 50-50. I think it's more likely that they bring him back. But I think if I had to rank the 3 of the likelihood of them returning, I think Knox is by far number 1. I think Poyer is ahead of Edmonds, and I think Edmonds is 3rd.
I had most likely, I think, to get done right away is Jordan Poyer. I think that if there's one that's going to just come out, it's going to be that Poyer one and just get him. And I don't think it's going to be crazy. I think that they'll, like you said, maybe shift some money around, do something that's not totally crazy. They keep him here for at least another 2 years with an option to get out going forward. And then I'm with you. I think if it's me being Brandon Bean getting these done, I'm trying to lock up Knox. I'm trying to get that done. The dollars you're talking about, I don't disagree with you. The only thing that makes me think is like, thank you for your service, Gabe Davis. I'm excited to get the rest of this contract out of you, but I'm not going to be able to afford to pay people that we're throwing the ball to, plus Josh Allen, the amount of money and amount of resources that you're going to be tying up to do that. I don't know what the cap number is going to go into in the future, but it screams to me like, hey, you're keeping either one of those guys. Like, you have to split up where you're at. So that concerns me a little bit.
We'll get to Gabe Davis and Ed Oliver both have multiple years left on it. We'll get to that. You can also structure their deals in a way that since it's 2 more deals and you're not even starting it for a 3rd year, you can have that lower first year. And now you're talking 3 more years and it's 4 years from now when the big money hits. 4 years from now, there's a lot of guys being paid big money that will start to come off
the books, right.
So some of that balances out.
For sure. Tremaine Edmonds is one that I think is, I want to get Knox done more. I want him on this team more than I want Tremaine Edmonds, but I think internally at One Bills Drive, I think there's a pretty much a priority to get Edmonds as part of this for another second contract. I think they've invested a lot into him. It matters. I think, like you said, the captain of the defense, the quarterback of the defense, all those things, that matters to them. And we talk about him as a, having struggled and middling linebacker at times. But I think if you got to look at the internal grades that the Bills use, not PFF grades, what they're asking him to do and how they're grading him out on what he's expected to do, I think that they are way higher on Tremaine Edmonds than he's viewed by Bills fans and outside of the building. And so I think that they're going to prioritize that, because we see those plays, specifically some of the Titans game, the New England Patriots game, where you see a big run get broken, or that Indy game, and we see Tremaine Edmonds, because he's a pterodactyl in the middle, and you see this big athletic freak look like it overruns a gap, but we don't know what his responsibility in that is, and only the Bills know. And that's why I mentioned, and I think their internal grades, knowing what they're asking him to do and the responsibilities, and this is something that we've talked offline with Eric Turner quite a bit. I know that he's tried to put that out there of, what are the expectations of him within this defense, especially in those run fits. It's hard for us as fans to grade, like, well, he's not doing the things that we want to see him doing, but also separating, well, what is his responsibility? Is he doing what the coaches want? Because ultimately that's what matters, especially in a Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier scheme, is that you're doing your 1 of 11. No matter where the play goes, you have to be where you're supposed to be, because if you're out of position, the one time the play goes that way, then it's also going to be a big play. So I think internally his grade is above middle. I think that they are high on him, and people are sick of hearing about his age, but
you just saw the panel of NFL executives voted him the 7th best linebacker in the league.
Yeah. We do have some issues with some of those executive lists, but
sure,
it's not nothing.
It's still correct. It still shows you how much he's valued by informed people on the team, and that, I get called like a Edmonds apologist, even though I just say, yeah, he's pretty good and he's above average, but so is Matt Milano. Whatever you think Milano is, Edmonds is as good as him. They are the same kind of linebacker. They have different skills, different things, but all the things that we rail on for overrunning plays, not getting off of blocks, shooting the wrong gap and guessing wrong, Matt Milano does those things just as often as Tremaine Edmonds does.
He gets his hands on a few more balls.
Yeah, we never complain about that, but every time Edmonds does it, we complain about it.
And my point to that is, I'm not sure that Matt Milano or Tremaine Edmonds are top 10 linebackers in football, but I think as a unit, and being able to stay in nickel with Taron Johnson and have those two be your linebackers, I think as a unit, they're a top 5 unit in the NFL. And not that
when you have 2 above average starters who can both do all the things,
I think it's fair. So I think they want to keep that together. So I won't be surprised. I agree with you that might be one that they want to get a look. And that's maybe similar to a Taron Johnson, where he starts out the season really well, doing all the things they want to do, that they get that deal done. But the one that I think could be coming here in training camp is Jordan Poyer. And then I think everything else, they might let it work out. Even this Knox one, Knox really only has the 1 season of production. They might want to see, hey, if we're going to invest that kind of money that you're talking about, and not get suckered into living off the production of that 1 season, they might want to get a look at him this year. And like you said, get that deal done prior to free agency next year. I can see that type of situation happening for Knox too.
And all logic in me agrees with that, but his best season's as good as David Njoku's best season. He was better than him last year.
It's a weird market.
And they were so afraid of the tight end market, which again, I toot my own horn all the time about salary projections. I'm pretty good. I've hit a bunch of Bills ones down to the dollar. I was horrible in this tight end market. Every single guy got 50, 70. Some of the guys literally double, 100% more than I projected. Every single tight end contract was, oh my God, why do they keep paying that? And it was over and over and over again, to the point where I don't know what number they need to lock Dawson Knox up at, but every time, as much as they wait, it's only going to get worse, and then replacing him will be only that much harder to find. So I'm curious where that goes.
His agent must have just been cackling every tweet that came out about tight ends. Like, they did what? They paid what? But what I will say, this will be an interesting case study for Brandon Beane because, he talked about specifically that Jaguars one. Now, that's an anomaly. Jaguars signing Kirk to that deal.
Christian Kirk
like, we're not going to let
that was like the CJ Mosley linebacker one that they're like,
we're not.
But this one was
teams.
a dozen tight ends all signing for that.
But I don't know that you can chase the Browns doing a bad deal with Njoku and then chase a bad deal.
Correct. But the hard part is that one is the most egregious, but it's followed immediately by Will Dissly and CJ Uzoma and even we haven't even seen Mike Gesicki.
Ian Thomas. Somebody just brought that. Chris Janke brought the Ian Thomas deal.
Yes. It's all of those are at numbers that we would have expected to be in play. Whereas now people before thought it was going to be like 3 years, $24 million, like $8 million a year. It's going to be freaking close, like almost double that. It's going to be 50% more than that at minimum. So, and on top of that, because of the depth of those numbers, the franchise tag number next year is like 12.9 million. Yeah. So now, even if they want to say, hey, let's just franchise tag him, that starts at $12.9 million. It's crazy.
Yeah. Now, to Thomas's point here, the problem of waiting on Knox potentially leaving, and they want to keep Josh happy. And I think a lot of people are concerned that if you wait on Knox and he has a bigger season, which I am projecting that the Bills need to make him sort of that wide receiver 2, feed this guy the ball. How high is that cap on the tight end? Like, can he play to a level where it just makes it like the Bills can't even keep this guy? Because the value that you're talking, that contract, that's a good deal for a tight end. Like, can he do anything this year that is just going to blow the doors off of, hey, the Bills can't even bring this guy back? Or is it kind of like, hey, it's going to be in this ballpark whether or not he has the type of season he had or even outdoes it this next year?
Yeah, it is interesting when you frame it that way, because I don't think there's really a scenario where it gets beyond 15 million.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like if he has, literally like a 85 catch, 1,100 yards, 11 touchdown season, like a Pro Bowl season, a Darren Waller, George Kittle, Travis Kelce type season. I do think it still only maxes out at like 15 million. So what you're rolling the dice on is probably not that big. And in that case, franchising him at 12.9 million is fine. Like, hey, well, I guess that's what we had to do. Yeah. So I do think that the risk is lower of letting that go. And if all of a sudden he has another season, which this past year, I brought it up lots of times. Bills fans love to throw out the fact that he's already a top 5 tight end, and he's not. Dawson Knox is not. Now, if you want to say his potential could be, but last year he had the 18th most catches among all tight ends and the 15th most yards. Yes, he tied with 5 other guys for the lead in touchdowns. Touchdowns are always historically wonky. So going through there, that's just not the reason.
Yeah, it's like Jordan Phillips having a huge sack season.
Correct.
Right.
Or like trying to say Robert Tonyan is the best tight end in the NFL because he had an 11 touchdown season. It's just not the way that works. So does he have the potential and capacity to get there? Yes. But what if he has another season that's also 52 catches for 700 yards and 6 touchdowns? Maybe he doesn't get that contract, and maybe it's closer to the 12 million. So I don't know. Maybe there's a reason that they hold off and wait, but it certainly seems like he's someone they value as an organization.
Yeah, and after seeing that, I don't know if it was an embedded or the.
I think it was an embedded series, but the going home or whatever it was called.
Yeah, the kind of guy he is. When you hear Sean McDermott talk about the team DNA and the type of guys they want, that whole episode just screamed lock Dawson Knox up in that building, because he's the guy that they're talking about when they're talking about all those DNA and the kind of players that they want in that building. So the production, we've heard Bean talk about ascending players and wanting to keep your own ascending players. It all lines up to him being a priority. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Any other? Yeah, I am going to see you in like 48 hours from right now. We will be having a beverage 48 hours from right now at Uncle Jumbo's Tasting Room on Elmwood Avenue, 8 o'clock. Come and have a drink with us. Come and ask questions about the Bills with us. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm going to walk down with Nate Geary. I'm going to go to his house and see his house and then walk down with him and have some Jumbos with you guys. So
I can't wait.
Come do that.
So for our final closing element here, we are going to have awesome coverage across the board. Our entire staff, like all of Cover One, is going to training camp over various days. Most of us the first 2 days, but plenty of guys over the remaining days. We're going to have all kinds of live reaction video clips, all kinds of things, kind of walking you through what we see at training camp as we get ready here. We're going to have all of our shows. We have the roundup. We have obviously our guys with the air raid hour. We have now Going Deep is on Tuesday nights at 7. Then we go into the film room on primetime at 9 o'clock on Tuesdays. We have disguise coverage on Wednesdays at 7, leading into us with Cover One Buffalo. All kinds of different stuff going on. We're working on maybe bringing back the Cover One Fantasy Show. A couple exciting things going that direction. So many good things to come. We're really excited to be able to bring everything to you. Make sure you give us a like, give us a rating, give us a review, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications. Every time we go live, you're going to be the first people to know about it. Appreciate Lee, always a huge supporter here, always here for us. But beyond that, Aaron, any final things for the people?
Yeah, no, man, I'm super excited. I'm excited to get around Bills fans, to get back to training camp, man. It's been a few years since we were able to be back at St. John Fisher. As much as I complain about the Bills going to Rochester and stuff, it's still fun to head out to Rochester and get your eyes on the Bills. Now that I do the post-game show, I don't get to a lot of actual games. So this is one of the few times a year that I get to actually be the fan in me and get to be around the Bills and visit. And if you're at camp and you happen to see us, we'll be wearing our Cover One gear. If you happen to see us, please come up and say hi. I absolutely love it. I got stopped at the zoo the other day. If the dude from the zoo is listening, that is the type of stuff that is absolutely awesome, because we make this podcast and we put it out there and we see the views on YouTube and we see the analytics. We don't really know that people are watching. And so when people come up to you and they talk about it, and it really just feels good, it makes it all really worth it. So come up, say hi, and let's talk about the Bills, because that's what we're going to be sitting around there all day talking Bills. So come and join us and make sure you introduce yourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah, the chat was awesome as well tonight. Thank you to Aaron Schatz. Thank you to the guys over at Football Outsiders. Awesome show. The chat was fantastic as usual. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I'm Greg Thompson. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.